That was the story of Sarah and Becky. Now, to talk more about the impact of self-harm and how widespread it might be, I'm joined by Dr. Farhana Mann, a psychiatrist at University College London. Thanks so much, Farhana, for joining us. Just help us understand why people self-harm.
Important question, but also quite difficult to answer, kind of simply. The main point, I guess, is that self-harm covers a very wide range of behaviours, and that it is a behaviour as opposed to a sort of condition, unlike something like depression, for example. So you may have a mental health problem and self-harm, you may not have a mental health problem and self-harm. So it's a very wide range of people. But in terms of why people might engage in the behaviour, people talk about sort of translating emotional pain into physical pain, finding that in some way easier to manage, trying to get relief, and watching sort of your self-harm bleed, and then the pain sort of goes. It helps to relieve the emotional pain, managing guilt, punishing themselves. There are often links with sort of trauma in earlier life, but it usually is associated with some degree of emotional distress and feeling overwhelmed by that.
And are you seeing it more in younger girls? I mean, are boys doing it as well?
Absolutely, yes. I think, again, the gender issue is a very interesting question. I don't think we've done enough studies to really tease apart how things differ between young men and young women in terms of how they self-harm. But certainly earlier studies suggested that perhaps young women self-harm by cutting more. Young men may sort of achieve a similar effect by doing different things, externalising more, maybe punching a wall or getting in a fight. And that's quite simplistic, and it certainly won't apply to all men and all women, and it might change over time. But those are some of the theories on why it may be that women are presenting to hospitals more with sort of behaviours like cutting. We might be missing some of the stats on men. But there have been recent stats to suggest that it has gone up in sort of 16 to 24-year-old young women, more so than men, as far as we can tell.
I mean, is there an attempt for greater awareness in trying to understand why?
I mean, one thing is a platform like this, so the fact that we're having this discussion here, you know, charities, young people themselves coming forward, like you've seen in the video, and saying, look, here I am, I'm a healthy, intelligent young woman, but there is this problem, and not only did I go through it, but I've recovered. And I think stories like that actually can have a massive impact. Hearing from people who've gone through the problem themselves, certainly working with the media to try and talk realistically about what we know gives us a much bigger platform than me, perhaps in a clinic with one or two people. So I think there have been efforts recently to kind of talk about it more. There have been a lot of celebrities talking about their experiences, making films about their experiences. We've got a long way to go to challenge stigma, but I do think that it's moving in the right direction.
What about globally? I mean, we're looking at this situation here in the UK, but yeah. Are we seeing a trend in other places, in other countries?
Again, I keep saying this, but it's a difficult one to answer simply. Obviously, I'm coming from the perspective of a British psychiatrist who's only ever worked in Britain, but we do have studies that people are doing in other parts of the world, and certainly the World Health Organization, places like that, does try to have a look at numbers of suicide, rates of suicides globally. There are some countries where it stands out that rates seem to be higher than here. Again, a complexity is that how they measure their rates may differ from country to country, so it's hard to make direct comparisons. But there are places, for example, in the Far East where rates are much higher. People are speculating whether that may be to do with sort of socio-cultural differences. For example, in Japan, it's at least 3 times as high as here. Factors like isolation, loneliness, perhaps a culture that might not encourage confiding in people, even though you might be surrounded by people. But again, these are speculative, so I think there does need to be more research, but there are differences that we might be able to learn from.
Dr. Farhana Mann, thank you so much for joining us. And just a reminder that you can find out more about the BBC's 100 Women on our website. Just go to bbc.com/100 Women. There you'll find all the profiles and the videos connected to the series.